Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. The Galien Week of Innovation has been made possible thanks to our precious friends and partners who share the Galien Foundation's values. First off, the two exclusive platinum partners are We would now like to acknowledge our two gold partners. Furthermore, we proudly introduce our corporate leaders partners. The associate partners are the grantors are To conclude, we are extremely fortunate to work with outstanding media partners who have contributed to the Galien Foundation's renown.
Warm greetings to you all. This is Tony Fauci here at NIH, and I'm very pleased to address you today at this year's Galien Forum. I would also like to extend my sincere congratulations to the winners of the 2021 Roy Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Award for Global Health Equity for their accomplishments and partnerships in the development of novel vaccines and therapeutics for COVID-19. They are Stéphane Bancel, CEO of Moderna, Albert Bourla, Chairman and CEO of Pfizer, Alex Gorsky, Chairman and CEO of J&J, David Ricks, Chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly and Company, George Yankopoulos, President and CSO of Regeneron, and Pascal Soriot, Chairman and CEO of AstraZeneca. As you can see from this first slide, I'm going to be discussing today the lessons learned and remaining challenges in the context of COVID-19 in 2021. I'm going to do this from 6 separate segments of the talk in which I will very briefly summarize pertinent and relevant facts on each. First, the epidemiology. We know now from close to 21 months of experience that we now have a pandemic of historic proportions, with over 240 million cases and about 5 million deaths globally. The United States has been one of those countries that's most severely hit, with 45 million cases and over 725,000 deaths. On this map here, the cases per 100,000 are indicated by the darkness of the blue shade in each of the states. Quickly, let's move to the virology. We know this is a beta coronavirus of the same subgenus of SARS-CoV-1 and certain bat coronaviruses. It's an RNA virus with a large genome of about 30 kilobases It has 4 structural proteins, the most important of which is the S or spike protein with its receptor binding domain that binds to the ACE2 receptor, a cell receptor on cells in the upper and lower airway, the GI tract, cardiovascular, and other tissues. The transmission of this virus is now very well delineated. It occurs by exposure to infectious respiratory fluids, either respiratory droplets or, as we've learned relatively recently, also aerosol particles. These are deposited on the mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, or eyes. Transmission is much less common, though this was not fully appreciated, much less common through contact with contaminated surfaces and fomites. And of course, the risk is greatest in enclosed spaces, particularly with poor ventilation, and during certain behaviors, such as exercise, hence the increased risk in gyms, singing, hence the increased risks in choruses and choirs in churches, for example, as well as prolonged indoor exposure. Another important and relatively unique aspect of this is that about 50 to 60% of all of the transmissions come from an individual who is asymptomatic, either someone who will never become symptomatic or an individual who is in the pre-symptomatic stage of infection. The clinical course for those who do get symptoms, and about 1/3 or 40% perhaps of individuals who are infected never experience any symptoms. But for those who do, the clinical presentation is very similar to a flu-like syndrome with the signs and symptoms as shown on this slide. One unique aspect of this is the curious loss of smell and taste, which generally precedes the onset of symptoms in a substantial number of people and often lingers on after the resolution of the infection and the disease. Now, for those, again, who develop symptoms, about 80% or so are mild to moderate, where about 15 to 20% are severe and critical, leading to an overall case fatality rate of about 2 to 3%, but much higher, up to 20%, in those who require mechanical ventilation. The people who are at increased risk for severe COVID illness are older adults and any individual at any age who have certain underlying conditions, particularly, for example, obesity, diabetes, chronic lung disease, hypertension, and other underlying comorbidities. With regard to therapeutics, there has been a number of studies that have gone on, and one can look at therapeutics from 2 fundamental vantage points. One, to target the virus itself. And the FDA has already approved one intravenously administered therapeutic, remdesivir. A number of other antivirals are in clinical trial, and a number of monoclonal antibodies have proved quite successful, particularly when administered early in the course of disease. Some have now also shown to be important in pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis. The other approach is to moderate the host response. For example, aberrant or inappropriate inflammatory and immunological responses later in the course of disease can be modified either by commonly used drugs such as dexamethasone or monoclonal antibodies against various aspects of the inflammatory pathway. What we have done most recently and have been putting a considerable investment is to identify vulnerable targets in the SARS-CoV-2 replication cycle and either to test already existing drugs or to design drugs to inhibit these vulnerable targets. This is a schematic of the replication cycle of SARS-CoV-2 showing some of these vulnerable targets in yellow highlight. This is very similar to what was done extremely successfully in the development of antiretroviral drugs for HIV and for drugs for hepatitis C. Hopefully will be met with the same degree of success. In this regard, recently a drug that had been developed before SARS-CoV-2, molnupiravir, which was developed by Merck and Ridgeback, which is now recently in a placebo-controlled trial shown to have the endpoint of preventing hospitalization or death by a 50% decrease in that endpoint between the treatment and the placebo arm. Of note, in the placebo, there was 8 deaths, whereas in the treatment arm, there were no deaths. This type of approach to therapeutics will continue in an accelerated form over the next year or so. Let's turn now to vaccines. This is truly the success story in the response to COVID-19. And in fact, the speed and effectiveness in which these vaccines were developed, literally within 11 to 12 months from the time the sequence was published on a public database, has been most extraordinary and truly unprecedented in the history of vaccinology. And in fact, Science Magazine, in their December 17, 2020 edition, deemed the COVID-19 vaccines the science breakthrough of the year. And what we have now, looking forward and actually backwards over the last 20 months or so, is that we have 3 platforms that have been used in vaccines which the US government has participated in the development of. That's the nucleic acid mRNA, the adenovirus vector, either human or chimp, as well as recombinant proteins. Of note, 5 of 6 of these have used the S2P immunogen, which was developed after years of research, predominantly by the NIAID Vaccine Research Center under the leadership of Barney Graham, Kizzmekia Corbett, and others. The developers are shown by the 6 companies involved, and importantly, already one, the BioNTech Pfizer, has received a full approval from the FDA. Moderna is right now close behind. J&J has received an EUA, and other of the products are now in line in various stages of development. The news about this and the results have been most extraordinary. First of all, the efficacy in clinical trials of the 3 products that I mentioned, Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J, are clear and unequivocal, up to 93, 94, 95% efficacy in some of these. Importantly, the effectiveness in the real-world setting has been extraordinary, where the results in a real-world setting are as good as, in some cases, even better than the efficacy in the clinical trials. But what has been important and has had a major impact on what has been now rolled out regarding the vaccines has been the impact of various SARS-CoV-2 variants. These are a list of selected variants. The one that has gained the most attention is the Delta variant, which now dominates in the United States. In fact, over the last several months, since the early summer, the Delta variant is now accounting for over 99% of the sequenced isolates in this country. And this is a global problem because now at least 173 countries throughout the world have Delta variants. Why is this important? The transmissibility is at least twice and probably more greater than the Alpha variant. And the viral loads in the nasopharynx of individuals, when you compare the Alpha variant with the Delta variant is up to 1,000 times greater in viral load, which clearly can explain the heightened transmissibility of this variant. In this regard and in that context, we have noted, and this has been universal throughout this country and the world, with a particularly significant amount of information that we've gotten from the Israelis, who are about a month or so ahead of us in all elements of the outbreak, vaccines, and boosters, as I'll mention in a moment. As you can see on this schematic here, various cohorts that have been followed by the CDC have a waning of efficacy over time when one talks about protection against infection. When you talk about effectiveness against severe disease leading to hospitalization, there are a hint of a diminution in some of these cohorts, as shown here, from 85 to 75, from 91 to 81. This is much more obvious and pronounced in cohorts in Israel, which have a healthcare system which make it much easier to get a more precise idea of what is going on with the vaccines and the waning immunity. In fact, in a number of recent studies, the waning immunity against both infection and severe COVID has been very, very clear in the Israeli cohorts, and this is across multiple age groups, not only the elderly. And in fact, in a relatively fully vaccinated population in Israel, what they have seen during the era of Delta is an increase in PCR positive infections and in severe cases, which leads to the entire issue of booster shots for SARS-CoV-2. If one looks at the induction of antibody titers following a boost, namely 28 days after a 2-dose mRNA vaccine, in this case, the Moderna, you see a dramatic increase in antibody titers from 55 to 872 in the younger individuals, from 18 to 64, and from 32 to 706 in more elderly individuals. The same is true to the Pfizer-BioNTech. Again, if you look at the blue bars and you see the antibody titers against the Delta variant, it goes from 241 to 1321 and 128 to 1479. Again, when you get to clinical situation, it's very clear now with data that continues to accumulate on a daily basis from Israel that 12 days or more after the booster dose, the rate of confirmed infection was lower in the booster dose than in the non-booster group by a factor of 11, and the rate of severe illness was lower by a factor of about 20. This is across all age groups. In a recent study by Baran and Milo from Israel, you can see that severe illness rates were down about 19-fold for ages 60 and above, and 22-fold for ages 40 to 60. This is a very dramatic slide because it shows the active severe cases by vaccination status in individuals 60 years old when you look at it per 100,000 population, as of just a couple of days ago. In the unvaccinated, it was 89 per 100,000. In those who got 2 doses of an mRNA, in this case, Pfizer-BioNTech, it was 13.9. And look at the difference in those who received a 3rd shot boost. It goes down to 3.5 per 100,000. So this has now triggered a good look at what the booster situation should be in the United States. And as we know, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine recipients who've completed their initial series at 6 months are now eligible to receive a booster shot if you're 65 years of age or older, or if you're 18 and older and you live in certain circumstances or work in certain situations or have certain underlying conditions, you are eligible for a booster. Just literally a day or two ago, the FDA had similar recommendations for the Moderna vaccine, whereas the J&J vaccine has eligibility for boosters in individuals 18 and older at least 2 months after the completion of the single-dose regimen. So the real question is going to be that we likely will look back on retrospectively. Are these booster shots a bonus, or should they have been actually part of the original regimen for optimal protection? My own personal opinion is that it is the latter. Very likely we will look upon this as part of the primary regimen for vaccination. I want to mention that when we talk about boosts, we really need to take into account that we must make sure that there is equity in the distribution of vaccines, particularly for those countries who have such a low percentage of people who've even received their first shot. And for that reason, the United States has been a leader in providing doses for low and middle income countries with a pledge or actual delivering already of 1.1 billion doses and pushing forth to get greater capacity from the companies involved to be able to give even more doses to the developing world. So in summary, I look upon this as a race between our ability to vaccinate not only in the United States, but throughout the world, And that race is against the virus. Because as long as there are substantial proportions of people in this country or throughout the world who go unvaccinated, this virus will seize the opportunity, as all viruses would, to be able to mutate and perhaps have a variant that can elude the vaccine. So it really is up to us and the responsibility that we all have to get as many people vaccinated as we possibly can, because if we do, we, this country and the world, will win the race against SARS-CoV-2. Thank you.